Scarbs, Toro Rosso.
Yes, it's forever when you talk about Toro Rosso, everyone always talks about them being the Red Bull sister team and that they don't have their own design team. But when you actually look at what Toro Rosso have done for the past few years, they've very much, ploughed their own farrow and they've got their very own sort of design philosophy. This year, obviously, Giorgio Ascanelli had left the team during last year. James Key from Sauber, obviously previously Force India and all the other versions of the team since the Jordan days, has come on board. And his first priority really is to try and get the car working in a wider window of setup, which is both the problem that Toro Rosso have had over the past couple of years, but equally is very important for the new Pirelli tyres this year. So some of the biggest changes are ones that we won't actually see. It's just in the philosophy of how the suspension works and how it all gets set up. But in design terms, the car again is quite a departure from what we've seen for the past 2 years. These heavily undercut, almost double floor style side pods that have been at the signature of the car for the past 2 years have gone for a much more conventional side pod radiator layout. They're still undercut, and they still have the semi-Coanda McLaren style exhaust, which they raced with last year, is still in place. But you can see there's been lots of very different thinking going into the car this year. One of the most interesting features, again, probably not again one of the big performance differentiators because we keep looking at noses, is that they have a modesty panel over their nose. But rather than it being nicely blended in, you can actually see the split line where this panel adjoins the crash structure part of the nose, and actually gives you an appreciation of how big this fairing is, which obviously is relatively thin, flimsy carbon fibre. It only weighs a couple of 100 grams, but it's a talking point this year, and it's interesting to see exactly what the shape of the nose is underneath this.
Last year we quizzed James Key as to why Toro Rosso were doing their own gearbox and not taking the Ferrari gearbox. Any sight yet of what the transmission's like on the new James Key car?
Well, I understand that it's a new transmission, but it's very much following the design path they had last year. Although, obviously, they've now announced that they're going to be going to Renault engines for 2014. Obviously, the big engine change rule changes for next year, so that they will be able to borrow the Red Bull gearbox. So this will probably be the last year they develop their own gearbox and gear case. But Toro also have a unique gear case. They've had this for a couple of years now, where the gearbox, where normal structure for most teams is actually split into two pieces. You have a cast titanium gear case, which sits towards the rear, which holds the differential and the gears. And rather than that bolting directly to the engine, they have a carbon fibre bell housing, effectively, which houses all the suspension, all the springs and the dampers and the anti-roll bars. So when you actually want to take the gearbox off and access the clutch in the gearbox, you just remove the metal part of the gear case, leaving the inboard part of the suspension in place, so they can get nice clean access to the workings of the gearbox. So I think that's all stayed very much the same this year, but will be the last year that they develop their own gears.
Yes, and for everybody at Toro Rosso, I'm sure they're breathing a sigh of relief to be running the same engine as the, dare I say it, parent team, Red Bull. I mean, that was always a bit odd, but it's logical now. It does raise the question, however, of what will happen perhaps to Williams' Renault deal, or maybe Caterham's Renault deal for 2014. And with Toto Wolff at Mercedes, one wonders whether or not Williams might be putting their hand up and saying, can we have Mercedes engines, please? But anyway, that's a little bit further down
Yeah.
down the road. But just talking about Williams, Scarbs, your take on the late launch of the Williams. They're still running the FW34 down there. What's your feeling about that?
Of all the years recently, I mean, this is probably one of the best years where you don't need to rush a new car out straight away. They've got a completely new breed of Pirelli tyres to test. They've got a proven car that they can actually get this first test done, get loads of tyre data understood. The cars aren't changing very much. They've actually been running the FW34 with a modesty panel over the nose. So it gets very confusing when people think, well, this isn't the new Williams, but it doesn't look like the old Williams. So I don't think it's any great loss to them. I think it just gives them time to get the new car absolutely ready. It's given them a couple of extra weeks of development over the other teams. So I don't think it's anything to worry about. I don't think it's a huge advantage for them either.